Missouri's abortion ban may be put to a vote in 2020. Yesterday, the state's appellate court decided to allow the ACLU to begin collecting signatures to put the new law to a public vote. The ACLU needs to collect over 100,000 signatures to get the law on the ballot. The panel of judges ruling in the case say Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft was wrong when he rejected efforts to send the law to voters. Earlier, Anne Marie and I spoke with CBSNews.com reporter Kate Smith and began by asking her, what does this law entail?
Yeah, so Missouri's anti-abortion law that they passed earlier this year is one of the most restrictive anti-abortion laws that we saw in this very anti-abortion restrictive law session earlier this spring. So it does a few different things. First of all, it has an 8-week ban on abortions, which is their definition of a heartbeat bill. They also do a lot of other things, including tax breaks to pregnancy resource centers, which are groups that don't agree with abortion. And so they try to offer alternatives. And then some of them, not all, of course, spread some pretty bad misinformation about abortion. So they're giving tax incentives to those. They're increasing the tax incentive. They're also changing the parental consent laws. And then what I find the most interesting about this one is they have a contingency plan. So if the 8-week ban isn't found constitutional, then there's another one. There's a 10-week ban. And if that's not found constitutional, there's another one. There's an 18-week ban. So these guys are really pragmatic in their wishes to really end abortion in the state.
So how did the ACLU get involved?
So what they wanted to do is they felt as if this new law didn't represent the people of Missouri. And so in Missouri, what you can do is if you feel that way, you can actually petition the Secretary of State to put it to a referendum in, the following election year. And so for them, that would be, of course, 2020. And then what you need to do is you need to collect 100,000 signatures, and then you can get that referendum vote. So the ACLU was petitioning the Secretary of State of Missouri to get that petition started, and they won that case yesterday. Originally, the Secretary of State had rejected that, but yesterday, that court, as you mentioned, found that to be an incorrect conclusion and that they should be allowed to proceed.
That is really interesting because, these are often state legislatures that are quite conservative. They're Republican leaning. And I've always said, well, if people in the state voted for these lawmakers, aren't these the laws that the people in the state want? Well, the ACLU is saying, let's ask them if that's what they want. What's the likelihood of the ACLU getting those signatures?
I mean, that's a great question, right? And I don't think anyone knows right now. But, in talking to people in the state, I've spent a lot of time in Missouri, in St. Louis, and some other more rural areas. And I have to say, a lot of people don't agree with this law. And I've spoken to people who are just, I'm pro-choice, and I don't believe that the state should regulate this. And then what's more interesting, I find, is when people tell me that they're anti-abortion, but they recognize their neighbor might not be. And so I think this will really challenge people to say, this isn't about whether you don't believe in abortion. This is whether or not you believe that your beliefs should then be put onto your neighbors and your family and friends, regardless of what their beliefs are. So I think that'll be really interesting. And the state population is 6 million about, and they need 100,000 signatures. So we'll be watching.
Yeah.
So what happens if they don't collect enough signatures?
The law will go forward.
Yeah.
I was speaking to some lawyers that are, watching this very carefully, and the idea is that if this petition doesn't work, then they'll pursue legal action, like you've seen in so many other states. But they'd like to see this play out first because this is so powerful. This would be the people of Missouri talking about their own laws, not a national activist group coming in and challenging a law.
Let's talk about, let's revisit this whole idea of the last abortion clinic closing. There's a back and forth. What's going on with that?
So a couple weeks ago, it was decided that they're going to get a preliminary injunction, or the equivalent of a preliminary injunction for this administrative court. And what that means is that Planned Parenthood of St. Louis will be allowed to continue operating until a final decision is made on whether or not the license was properly not renewed. What that means basically is that this is all about whether or not the state health department acted appropriately. This has nothing to do with Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, or the legality of abortion. It is simply administrative. Now, yesterday I saw that they're actually extending that final court date until the end of October. What that means is that abortion at least in the Planned Parenthood of St. Louis, will be allowed to continue until that date.
And we should sort of clarify, these are sort of two tracks to restrict abortion in the state. What we've just been talking about is something you've been covering for several weeks, and it's about sort of regulations on clinics that also provide abortions. Planned Parenthood provides all sorts of medical intervention and help for women. One of the services is abortions. That clinic would shut down, and presumably there would be other healthcare available.
Yes.
But that's so. I just want to clarify because it gets
It gets
confusing.
confusing after a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you for
Thanks, Kate.
having me.